Next question, how much of my business do I own? The difference between my total assets and my total liabilities is my equity. And we want to build our share of ownership in that business over time. I want to own more of my business than anybody else does. The way I like to look at that is debt to asset ratio. There's debt to asset, equity to asset, debt to equity ratios. For myself, debt to asset is very straightforward. We just look at the total farm liabilities. So we're back to the balance sheet. We're using our balance sheet again. Total farm liabilities divided by total farm assets. In my example here, the debt to asset for this farm was 18%. Again, how do we know what's good? We're a long way past the time when farms routinely, by the end of their careers, would have zero debt. There are farms that have zero debt, but there's a lot that have significantly more. Of the farms in the dairy summary in 2015, they averaged 32%. So as we look at our scale here, just at the very top of caution and going into strong there. I did adjust this. I'm saying strong is less than 30%, 40% is not bad, but I'm very concerned because you can read things in the popular press and there are people out there saying that 60% debt is no problem. That is a very bad place for most farms to be. There are times in the farm life cycle, a new farm, it's growing, they've done a bunch of building, where you might have some debt levels pushed up that high, but for the most part, for average farms, 60% debt is asking an awful lot of those cows. So this is conservative, but when you think about it, if you're at 30 or 40% and a 15 and a 16 comes along and you have maxed your line of credit, what's happening to your debt to asset ratio? Suddenly you can bump up 5–10% in a hurry. And you don't want to cut off your options in terms of being able to borrow for other activities if that makes your farm more profitable in the long term, and you can make that case. So keeping debt under control as much as possible, preserving that equity is important. For farms that have done analysis over time, they do get an opportunity to see how they've performed. Here's a sample farm, and their debt to assets started in about 15%, and every year as you continue to do analyses, you can see that trend. And if the trend, kind of leveled out, but generally going down, and that's what we like to see, because that means he owns more of his business now than he owned at the beginning, 10 years ago. So tracking this is important too. So do I own more of my business this year than I did last year? And ultimately, what are my goals? What level of debt am I comfortable with, and what level of debt can my cows handle? When you see debt to assets starting to trend up, you need to ask why, and if we see that starting to trend more sharply, why did that happen, and what can we do about it? Is there a reason? Because I did a lot of construction, so actually my balance sheet's going to take a hit because I can't value those buildings at exactly what it costs me to build them. My debt to assets probably going to go up. But is it because of that, or is it because I've incurred a lot of operating deficits? Next question, are we making money, and are we making enough money? If you don't have tons of records, this worksheet should be in your packet. And you can take this and your income tax statements for the past 5 years or so. You can go back as long as you want. But simply by taking Schedule 1040F, using 4797 if you put cull cow sales on there, looking at your income, your expenses, adding back your tax depreciation, you'll get how much cash was actually available in a year. And if we look at 1 year, income tax forms are not stellar because we might have taken a lot of income tax depreciation. We might have unpaid bills sitting out there if we didn't pay them, and this is a real challenge tax-wise. If you haven't been able to pay your bills, you can't charge them as expenses. So you may actually, some farms unfortunately get into a situation where they didn't make money but they owe taxes because they've got a lot of unpaid bills sitting out there. But looking at this over time gives you a feel for whether that business has been generating enough cash or not. Because this cash needs to pay you. It needs to pay any taxes if there have been good years. And long term, we want to pay taxes. We want to do well enough, we have to pay taxes. It needs to be reinvested in the business if that isn't a goal of the farm operation, and to put away for retirement. So if a farm does all the, and one of these days I'll actually get this into a spreadsheet, right now it's just on paper, but if they put all the numbers in there and the bottom line averages not enough to cover those things or negative, and you can then see also how many years did you make money and how many years did you not make money. That helps you kind of really get a numbers feel for what's going on in the business. Bottom line, net farm income, we need to know what the net farm income from the business is. You know, what is the farm making money? So it's your cash income minus your cash expense. So here's the checkbook, here's the tax statement. What they don't capture are the last two items. So I might have spent a lot of money raising feed this year, but I have twice as much corn silage as I did last year. Other amounts of crops are the same, but I might have spent a lot of money, but I'm building up feed reserves for maybe milking more cows or changing my ration and buying less feed. So if I only look at this, it might not look too good. But then if I look at my beginning and my ending balance sheets and say, how do my current assets compare to my current liabilities? Do I have more feed on hand? If I have more feed on hand, that difference in the more feed's value gets added to this cash income and becomes part of my net farm income. If some of that feed was raising more cows that I have kept, and I was milking 80 cows at the beginning of the year and I'm milking 20 cows, or no, wrong way, 100 cows at the end of the year, I've got 20 more cows than I did at the beginning of the year. And so the value of my breeding stock inventory is likely to be higher. And that would be with saying if my cow's worth $1,000 at the beginning of the year, I have them worth $1,000 at the end of the year per head. So any dollar difference in my livestock inventory is income to my farm. I can't pay bills with it right now, but the expenses that I have out there went to building up those inventories. And then finally, realistically, over time, we have to say, I used my machinery and equipment, I used my barns, and I'm not going to buy a new one this year, but I used up part of it. And over time, I've got to pay a little bit of that every year, so I have dollars there to replace those when I need to. And so the depreciation here isn't the depreciation from your income taxes. But in our analysis, what we do is we charge 7% of the machinery and equipment inventory is the value that we used, the cows used that year. 5% of the building value is what our cows used that year. So it represents the use over time of the physical plant of your farm operation. So net farm income is also something that tracking over time is useful. For farms, our sample farm here that had done analysis, we have analysis for multiple years. You can track that net farm income over time. So first good thing we see here is it's positive. But do we know if it's enough or not? You know, if this is a 1 or 2 family operation, one family without a whole lot of debt, it's probably pretty comfortable. But if we're trying to support 3 families on this net farm income, then that's probably not sufficient. So we also have to look at, is it positive and is it enough for what we are trying to accomplish in that farm? And are we putting some cash away on these better years to deal with the years that have the downturn? Because if this kind of thing comes along, and we've seen it, if we don't have cash reserves to deal with a net farm income loss, where's this difference between 0 and minus 60 coming from? How much of my business do I still own? Because somebody else owns more of it now than they did at the beginning of the year. And we also don't want to see a zero net farm income because we've got to pay ourselves. We have to pay taxes, we have to pay principal. That's what the net farm income has to do.